Can everyone online hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes.
That's not new speakers today.
Good.
Yeah.
Right. Is that, has that before we start officially, one person's running a few minutes late. Okay, so we usually have quorum. So this meeting is called to order, taking roll call. I'm here, of course, Vice Chair Lardy is absent today, second present, Board Member Knappett,
Present.
Board Member Gong. Present. Board Member Myers running a little late, Board Member Morgan,
Present.
Board Member Williams.
Yes, I'm just.
All right, so item 2 is we have our land acknowledgement. The Resiliency Advisory Board acknowledges that we are on the traditional territory of the Kumeyaw, Louisiana, Kupeño, and Kula. Today, the Kumeyaw people continue to maintain their political sovereignty and cultural traditions as vital members of the Sandhill community. We are honored to share this space with them, and we thank them for to item 9A before 8A, as per Vice Chair Lardy's request to make it a meeting since 9A could form 8A.
So removing by teams, yeah. Mark's gonna join that after.
Okay, so we can just switch over all of 9 before all of 8, and that case just keep it simple.
And do 9C, 9C, and then
Yes.
9A.
And then just, yeah, 8A after that. Any motion to approve the agenda as amended?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor? Opposed? Right. Item 4, do we have any announcements from city staff or other board?
Just a quick announcement for us, Coastal Resilience Master Plan is going to Environment Committee this afternoon. So that is exciting. The Resiliency Advisory Board's recommendation is part of staff's presentation. I think that's all for staff announcements.
It's at 1 p.m.
That is at 1 p.m.
Will be recorded for those of us who are probably having lunch.
Yeah.
That time. Any other updates from the board? Okay. Item 5, approval of the minutes. Any questions, comments on minutes from May 15th? Anyone would like to make a motion to approve this?
Yes, I'll move to accept the minutes. Submit.
Second. Second. All in favor? Opposed? No. Alright, do we have any non-agenda public comment?
So for non-agenda public comment, if you're in person, you may address the board on any matter not listed on today's agenda. Please complete and submit a speaker form. For virtual, raise your hand either by tapping the raise your hand button on your computer, tablet, or smartphone, or by dialing *9 on your phone. You will be taken in the order in which you raise your hand. You may only speak once. When the chair indicates that it's your turn to speak, click the unmute prompt that will appear on your computer, tablet, or smartphone, or dial *6 on your phone. We will do in person first. Yeah. Do we have any virtual non-agenda public comment? It looks like no.
We did have a comment submitted in writing. Was that for non-agenda or is that attached to 9B?
No, there was a non-agenda public comment submitted that is posted on our Resiliency Advisory Board webpage.
So they have that option if they're unable to attend virtually. Item 7, we have none unfinished business because it was very efficient at the last meeting without me. All right, so we move on to item 9, and I believe Mark Berenger will be here at 9:30. You said so. We'll move on to 9B, which is presentation on improving wildfire resilience through building codes by Josh Dean.
He is attending virtually. Josh, do you want to share your screen or do you want me to run the slides for you?
And I have a little bit to say, and
introduction
Okay,
to
perfect.
Okay.
Josh.
Yep.
Talking. So by way of introduction, I would just say that, this is all part of the presentations that we as board members are making for each other. And in our work plan, it says that we are educating each other with regard to issues that are of concern, critical to the city and guided by current events and public interest. And that out of these conversations, we can identify areas of future action. And or use the presentation to inform our recommendations that we're going to be making at the end of the year. So there were 3 areas of energy that have kind of been discussed and that I've kind of grouped together here, having gotten the mantle for the energy area. Wildfire resilience being one of them, grid resilience, and then energy storage. Combine this with a hope that as we get into this area, we will, as a board, see that there's enough going on here to merit a focus for our work plan in 2026. Just in the way that we use wildfire resilience for this year, the whole topic of energy resilience, in my view, and I will make that case again as needed, that it merits the attention of this board. So I took those 3 topics and have kind of made a little bit of a series here. So this is the first one under wildfire resilience. This is where the energy area overlaps. I will also draw to your attention the written comment that was submitted, because this is another area where wildfire and energy overlap, in particular in the role that EVs can play as a resilience resource. So I'll put it out again under item 10 when we talk about future topics and how we might want to deal with that. So if you haven't had an opportunity to take a look at this comment, I recommend it to you. So today we have wildfire through building codes coming up in September. We've got the second one on grid resilience, setting the stage for a broader focus with a look at how the power system is essential to energy safety and resilience and justice by Lorenzo Christoph, who's one of the state's, if not the nation's, premier experts on grid resilience. And then in January or February, as we choose, Jose Torrebuenos, who's the author of this written comment, will come at our invitation when we're ready to do the presentation on energy storage. He's the executive director of the Center for Community Energy here in San Diego, and has a particular expertise in energy storage, particularly mobile energy storage. So with that, then, I'm going to turn it over to Josh for this presentation. Josh Dean is a senior consultant with 2050 Partners, where he focuses on energy policy and building decarbonization. He's also been the executive director of the California Energy Alliance, where he worked on appliance energy efficiency standards and decarbonization. But before that, I knew Josh as the executive director of the San Diego Green Building Council, where he did basically everything. So he knows a whole lot about this area. And finally, in addition, he is a member of our sister board, the Climate Advisory Board, although he's here on his own behalf. So I've asked him to help us understand better what can be done to build more resilient buildings. What are the technologies? What are the resources and the practices that help buildings, whether residential or commercial, survive this increasingly hot world that we're encountering? So take it away, Josh.
Thank you, Mr.
Thanks, Erica. Yeah, and Julia, feel free. I'll just alert you to advance to the next slide if that works.
Okay, perfect.
And Mr. Dean, we have about 15 minutes allocated, if that's sufficient time.
Yeah, that should be fine.
Topic.
Yeah, I'll try to get through it in case there's any questions at the end. So thanks, Erica, for that introduction, and thank you all for allowing me to speak today about this intersection between wildfire resilience and building codes. As you mentioned, we did have a chance to kind of catch up, and my background in green buildings and energy codes, thought this might be a good idea to kind of share with this group and discuss, what are the codes telling us that can be done with making communities more wildfire resilient. I do want to note too, and thanks for the bio background there, Erica, that I am here on behalf of myself and sort of representing myself in any sort of statements as well. So yeah, the agenda, just do want to quickly go over kind of the current building codes, where they're coming from, how some of these items sort of fit in and how they're developed, then going into some barriers into improving resiliency of buildings. Not a lot, but just kind of want to raise those concerns. and then spend most of the time kind of discussing ways to enhance building codes for better resilience. And then I'll wrap up on, kind of where we're heading, what we're seeing in policy activity, and how that's impacting the building codes. Next slide, please. So, what are the codes, really telling us right now? And first want to take a look at, what is law, where are we at, and how this is applicable to this topic. And so the California Code of Regulations, Title 24, that's, the California Building Standards Code, or Title 24 in general, those are administered by the California Building Standards Commission and are developed and approved and adopted on about a 3-year cycle. And so that's where you'll see everything. On the left-hand side, no need to try to read that, but it just shows sort of the tedious process that goes into this development, the number of agencies, state agencies, advocacy groups, utilities, trade and industry groups, general public, that all get involved in this process to try to encourage and improve the building code. And so on the right, this is sort of the makeup of Title 24. And a lot of times, when we discuss Title 24, a lot of people think about just the energy code portion, but there's a whole lot more to it when it comes to the existing building code, to the electrical, mechanical, plumbing, green building code, whatever. It's all kind of packaged up into this Title 24 building standards. And so what I'm going to kind of focus on a little bit, because I think this is where it touches more of the wildfire resiliency in buildings, particularly, and as Erica alluded to, and I'll touch on, there are some items related to EVs as well as battery energy storage, and kind of how all of that is found in the building code and how maybe those can continue to be updated to help encourage and improve resiliency with building codes. And so Part 6 is the energy code that's developed by the Energy Commission, and that's really where we see a lot of the regulations around energy efficiency, envelopes, renewables, plus energy storage, and a lot of that can kind of come into play in wildfire-prone areas, as well as Part 11 is the California Green Building Standards Code, also known as CalGreen. This is the first in the nation mandatory green building standards code, and this really aims to reduce kind of the environmental impact of buildings. And so this could be a good place to introduce newer technologies or other building features that don't really fit into other parts of the code. And finally, this kind of noted here are REACH codes. Those are another set of tools that local jurisdictions have. There's some REACH codes in the San Diego region, but these really exceed state codes and provide flexible tools to achieve local policy. So some jurisdictions have included provisions for electrification or higher efficiency standards, or maybe encouraging more PV or something along those lines. So that's where there's various levels of how you can kind of dive into the different codes and standards to help improve resiliency as well. Next slide. And then diving further into kind of San Diego area, I looked at, some existing building codes and different regulations that may address defensible space here, fire resistant materials, site design. And these codes are really essential for reducing the risk of wildfire damage to structures. And so San Diego has added some local regulations from the Part 2 of Title 24 that I just showed that relates to fire protection. And I just wanted to call these out so you can see that this is already occurring locally to try to address some of these wildfire kind of prone areas and ways to be more resilient. So, one example on the top here is looking at roofing and roof gutters and downspouts and making sure that they're constructed of non-combustible materials. There's another one on the bottom where it's focused on places located in a very high fire hazard severity zone. And, they're adding on to what's kind of a part of part 2 of the code, but they're looking at a spark arrestor. So, having a chimney or some sort of flue, having it equipped with a spark arrestor to prevent any sort of embers from flying out and then causing a spark elsewhere. So a lot of this is occurring, and I think we can continue to build on it, but I'm trying to just highlight where these kind of different approaches and different ways to enhance the building code might fit in. Next slide, please. And so before I really kind of get into those key areas that we could enhance, I did want to just share, there are some barriers to improving resiliency of buildings, and we're seeing this through various energy code updates and all that kind of stuff. But cost being one of those, it's always a huge concern, especially here in California. But many of the measures that can improve resiliency of buildings could be expensive. Whether it's fire-resistant roofing, backup power systems, these could sort of deter owners from making the upgrades. They're looking to compliance and enforcement. Building codes do require certain resiliency measures, but they're maybe not always enforced. So that can lead to buildings that are not adequately protected against disasters. And again, this is, kind of what I've seen across the board. So nothing particular about San Diego or the San Diego region. It's more of just kind of things being heard across the state. Conflicting codes, and not going to lie, coming from a code background, there are a lot of different building codes and regulations and applicability, so they can be confusing. And multiple codes and regulations that apply to buildings can lead to conflicting requirements or confusion for buildings and homeowners. Limited technology and knowledge as space does grow. The specialized technology, could play into the cost factor, but also sort of the knowledge around proper installation and even ongoing operations of these types of technologies and systems. And then the resistance to change. I feel like there's always that, no matter what kind of topic we're talking about, but sort of the resistance to adopting new building practices. That's traditional building methods or materials are kind of commonplace. So having to try to incorporate the installation of some new types of technologies or building strategies could take a little time. So to really overcome these, it might be necessary to incentivize homeowners and builders to invest in resiliency measures, increase enforcement of the building codes, maybe streamline some of the codes and regulations to reduce these conflicts, and then provide education and training to help promote, the adoption of these new technologies and practices. So that's probably, obviously where this group really fits in well, in sort of that education and training and promoting some of these new ideas and practices to generate some public awareness around the topics. Next slide, please. So getting into how we can maybe enhance the building codes for better resilience. Like I just kind of mentioned, there's incentive programs already out there. Maybe there's additional ones that could come into play. Things like self-generation incentive programs, which has been around for a while, really incentivizing on-site, renewables and storage. But more recently, programs really shifted in response to climate change and increasing wildfire threats and power outages to fund primarily energy storage projects with a focus on fire-prone, low-income, and disadvantaged communities. There's let's talk about improve the code. So, maybe focus more on the envelope itself, looking at exterior spaces and landscaping. So that's where we can begin to come into play with maybe Cal Green or the Energy Code portion of Title 24. Better design standards. We can look to green building standards, and as Erica mentioned, my background is kind of with some green building advocacy groups, and so things like LEED, Passive House, Living Building Challenge, those are already kind of incorporating some of these technologies and building strategies to improve resiliency. So it can always begin to pull from some of those codes and standards to bring into sort of the baseline code that we do have in California. And I'll talk about Passive House in just a second. But then solar and storage, kind of tying back to that self-generation incentive program, this can be really effective during power shutoffs, high wind events, and things with fire risks. Next slide, please. And so, what can we really do to advance the technology around or improve codes around building resiliency? And looking at the Climate Resilient San Diego document, some of these bullet points, again, this is just a few, just to kind of highlight, are tied into that Climate Resilient San Diego document, where they touch on some of these topics through some adaptation strategies. So it could, through providing grid resilient services, through grid integrated vehicle programs. It also discusses developing resilient design guidelines, which I'll touch on in just a second. But you can see here, like I said, these are just a few areas that I think, beginning to identify and support those real envelope type measures, or improving energy performance through the envelope and maybe unvented attics can help reduce fire risks. Looking into microgrids, specific regulations and best practices for HVAC, so the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, operation and maintenance, where it can really focus on the indoor air quality, during these fire events, looking at going ahead and requiring circuiting and smart EV charging and optimizing the use of vehicle to building technology to be able to power critical equipment in times of power shutoffs or fire events. Possibly, on-site water storage through rainwater catchment to really be used for firefighting, which I think saw some of that. People were using their pools in LA during those fires. Balanced ventilation, so that can help remove some of the smoke odor, and not necessarily where the fire is occurring, but nearby, so that you're still having that proper indoor air quality without introducing the smoke from the outside air. And then heat pumps and those kind of technologies are obviously growing as well. Next slide, please. Just a couple more. One thing I did want to highlight, like I said, there's these technologies and strategies that can happen, but there's other design standards like green building standards that are out there to pull from, Passive House being one of those. This is kind of really growing topic right now, and this image here comes from the tragic fires in the LA Palisades area. And this is actually a Passive House design home that withstood the fires. And so through a lot of these discussions, there's an assembly bill that's currently going through legislation that is looking at Passive House certification as a compliance pathway, because the Passive House standards are more resistant to pollution, wildfire smoke, extreme temperatures, and their design includes things like fewer vents, better insulation, better air infiltration. So these things really do enhance fire resilience by reducing the intrusion of embers into the home and kind of spreading that way. And they also have, landscaping and defensible space, sort of things that pull in that really do tie into this as well. Next slide, please. So I do want to just quickly finish up with kind of where it's heading and some of these policy the direction and things that are going to impact wildfire resilience and that we're kind of seeing and just bring to your attention. And so on the next slide, I probably should have reordered these numbers just so I give you the good and then the not so good. So I'm going to start with AB 368, which is Energy Building Standards Passive House Design. That's that piece of legislation that I just mentioned from Assemblymember Ward that is looking to originally create an alternative compliance pathway for Passive House design in the building code. That has now kind of been reworked and is actually being passed on to the commission to evaluate its cost effectiveness compared to other compliance pathways, and then they'll report back. So at least it's heading down a pathway to maybe begin incorporating some of these types of design practices into code. AB 306, this is related to state building standards and really came out of the housing crisis of availability and affordability, as well as some recent devastation from the fires. And essentially what this is doing, as I mentioned, Title 24, you got all the different parts. You got the energy code, the Cal Green, mechanical, electrical. Like I said, with the housing crisis and affordability, this is looking at pausing any sort of update to the building code, including the energy code and Cal Green and local reach codes between October of this year, 2025, through June 2031. So basically taking a 6-year pause, kind of like 2 code cycles, to allow maybe the market to catch up or hoping that it reduces home pricing. I got to weigh in one way or the other. This is still working its way through the Senate right now. It's passed the Assembly, but this is definitely something to track because it can have a wide-ranging impact on building codes. But do want to say that there are some carve-outs or some exceptions in this that are related to home hardening, fire safety, and protecting health and safety. So there could be avenues to kind of update through those exceptions when we talk about wildfire resilience. And then last slide, please. And then finally, some other kind of good news is I think as I was mentioning about maybe streamlining some of the codes, Title 24 Part 7, which was a placeholder. This is now kind of incorporating multiple areas of wildland urban interface codes, fire codes, natural resources codes, public safety codes under one code and under one portion of Title 24. And so this could be really great news in terms of kind of pointing into one direction instead of it all being spread across. And so again, going back to that sort of streamlining, improving the process for building codes. And this quote here at the bottom is from the Building Standards Commission that really assembles it in one location, many regulations related to construction and fire and life safety, where civilizations meet the wilderness. And so by bringing all this into one code book, designers, contractors, homeowners, and local jurisdictions will have this one-stop shop to find the laws and regulations needed to enforce and keep their communities safe. So I think an improvement here that we see already to try to streamline some of these codes that might be kind of dispersed across various portions of the code. And with that, I think next slide, that'll be it. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that crash course. And I did magnify the flow chart, which is pretty interesting. Do we have any
Thanks.
questions from the board?
Open up to public comment first.
Oh, yes, public comment.
So we'll open up to public comment. If you are virtual, you can either raise your hand via Zoom or dial *9 on your phone. If you're in person, submit a speaker slip. Okay. I do not see any hands raised, so we can turn it over to the board.
Board Member Williams, did you have a question?
Hi, Josh. Good morning. Appreciate the presentation. I just wondered, in your practice, have you observed any communities that have made some progress in really reaching out to people who own properties in fire hazard areas as to all of these new codes and requirements? And I guess it's a good idea that they're getting consolidated. But has anybody done a good job of, that you've seen, of really connecting and reaching out to help their residents who are affected by these codes?
Yeah, I'll repeat. You said any good examples of where people have reached out to communities impacted by wildfires to kind of push through with some of these codes? Sorry, it cut out a little bit there.
No, more like, what other communities who have created programs and ways to outreach to the residents that are affected by these codes to help them understand
I gotcha.
and make sure they. Okay.
Off the top of my head,
That's it.
yep, sorry, I'm cutting in and out a little bit there. I just off the top of my head, I don't have a concrete example for you. The one kind of incentive program that I think they started to do that and have done a good job. And like I said, it shifted as a self-generation incentive program because they did see that the folks in these kind of wildland areas and impacted by the public safety power shutoffs, high wind events, and wildfires, the critical kind of infrastructure to maintain, power and systems within their building or their home. They did a lot of outreach to them to try to encourage those communities to really sign up for that program to take advantage of on-site solar and battery storage so they could kind of maintain through those various types of events. I can try to find if there's any other good examples of maybe across the state of where that's happened.
Thanks.
Questions from the board? Yes.
Thanks, Josh. For slide 7, is that specific to, are those recommendations specific to areas that are prone to wildfire impacts? Is it targeted or is it more broad?
I mean, it's still broad because it can have broader code impacts, but I think that it does have, more specific applicability to wildfire areas. The kind of first bullet point of looking at kind of more envelope related stuff around vented attics, improving energy performance. Some of that is also pulled from things like Passive House and how they design the envelope. And so focusing in on the envelope first, that does save energy, but it could also help support those areas in fire risk zones. And I think, LA might be a good example, and like Palisades might not have necessarily thought that that's really a fire prone area where a lot of that devastation happened. Would kind of normally think of that, but seeing how quickly it spread, some of these kind of strategies might help. Not to say that it would have helped stop what happened there, but some other ways to help prevent sort of the spread. So there could be, yeah, these aren't necessarily directly targeted to that, but I did pull out some that do help support those particular areas.
Got it. And sorry, a few more. And what are are these for new builds? Are these specific to existing homes? How would this look from a code standpoint?
Yeah, good question. Probably, let's see. Some of these could be retrofitted to existing homes, replacing air conditioning systems, improving, what's there from a heat pump side of things, or improving the third bullet point is actually about operations and maintenance and how best to operate the ventilation system. Microgrids, I mean, sort of battery storage, renewable the self-generation center program I mentioned, that's all targeted towards existing buildings for the most part. But a lot of this can tie into new construction. So requiring circuiting and smart EV charging, the new building code does require basically all electric ready. And so it kind of ties into that. So, that would, requiring, additional circuiting or EV charging, that would be an added cost, which kind of ties into some of the barriers for existing buildings.
And then last question, I'm sure you get this. What's your messaging around balancing all of this with the current affordability issues, whether it's for new builds or existing home assets?
Yeah, I mean, that's always a difficult topic, and as mentioned, the reason, stated in AB 306 for home affordability. I will say any of these measures that do get passed through the energy code, at least the energy code portion, do have to go through a cost effectiveness analysis and show that it is cost effective to install and not raise, kind of over a certain life period, general costs. So it does go through that rigorous test. I do think that a lot of these can both save energy, but there's not really a metric out there that, at least in the cost effectiveness test, sort of brings in these external factors of wildfire devastation or, downtime for power if you lose, all of the food in your refrigerator because of a public or power shutoff. You can't really factor some of those things in as to, do those benefits outweigh the cost to improve some of these areas? So, the message, I think, depending on the location, that do have to begin to look at some of these external factors and metrics to begin to kind of say, does this really make kind of cost effectiveness sense, if you will, even though it's kind of hard to put a number on the benefits of, saving a home or, reducing the downtime in some of these events.
Thanks, Josh.
We have a
Mhm.
question from Board Member Garrett.
Yes, I was wondering, as a resiliency advisory board, we are focused a lot on wildfires, but also have discussed a little bit about like flooding and things. So I guess I'm wondering if I don't know what your group at 2050 Partners does, but do a lot of these strategies also serve to make the home more resilient for things like flooding as well? Or are there like trade-offs that you guys consider?
I think from there's probably different strategies for where homes or buildings are located. And that's where things like the reach codes can really help support kind of local jurisdictions, because it's more applicable to where, the building is being constructed that might have that impact. And the codes, it might be in a broader part of the code when you start to talk about flooding or, raising homes or, I'm from the East Coast and from the Southeast, and so we have to worry about hurricanes. And so we really look at windows and doors and raise elevations and all those kind of things. So I think it just depends on what is that sort of natural disaster or thing you're trying to be resilient around and adapt around. And the code can look into all of those. I would say that, these necessarily help what you just asked about. But there are, and again, these are just a few that I've pulled out because we could spend all day talking through what's currently there and what's coming. But yeah, you could definitely focus in on things like sea level rise or, adapting to the flooding and stuff too.
Yeah, no, I guess I just was wondering if some of the strategies that are advised for wildfire resilience because I assume some homes are kind of in what would be considered a wildfire risk and a flooding area.
Right.
So I guess I was just wondering about that, how you think about that. I was also wondering about insurance, for like I think was a crazy picture about the house that withstood the fires. And I know how hard it is to get insurance these days. Is there any like conversation around if these codes are implemented and someone's really following the codes, does that make insurance easier to get or gettable at all, or is there any connection there?
I mean, there is a connection. I'm not a expert in that in any way in sort of the insurance side of things. What I can speak to is I know back in my green building days, there was a lot of push around kind of resilient buildings, no matter where they were located, to adapt to hurricanes, wildfires, flooding, whatever. That there was a big push to engage the insurance industry
Yeah.
to highlight this building is more resilient, or this building will continue to stand after this event. So yes, please insure it or insure it at a lower rate. I think that's probably also what you're seeing in parts of the East Coast and stuff too, with hurricanes of different building materials raising the first level more than what it was before, all to try to encourage those lower insurance premiums, as well as even just being able to get insurance. I know that there's again a lot of discussion around wildfire and insurance there, and people pulling out of California with it. So I know that conversation has been had, but it's again back to some of the metrics and trying to calculate that has been part of the difficulty to really say, is this home compliant to it? Is it going to withstand it? So then what is the risk of insuring it, based on whatever those standards might be? But it is that discussion has been happening for a while. And I'm sure it is even more now, in California and Florida and kind of the East Coast.
We have to move on to the next item, but if there are any other questions from the board, Josh, could we send those to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with the board today, and thanks to Erica for arranging this.
Yeah, thank you all. Appreciate it.
I believe that we have Mark on the line ready for this presentation.
Do you want to do 9B then C and then A, or 9A then C?
Is Mark able to wait a bit while we go to 9C? It's all right, so we have Rachel ready to go? Yeah. For a moment to set up. This is for the resilience topic of this month, a presentation on San Diego Food Systems Working Group. Here we have with us Rachel Porto, we pronounced that correctly, Community Building Director with the organization, and just to thank Vice Chair Lardy for arranging this. Unfortunately, he is unable to attend the meeting today, but he will be here in spirit, I believe.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Nice to meet you all. There's like a note touching. I'm like, there's two screens. Oh, I see it up there. Thank you. Yeah, great to meet you. I'm representing the San Diego Food System Alliance. We have been around for 12 years now, actually. And we are a nonprofit here in San Diego County that focuses on building a more local, resilient, sustainable, healthy, just food system. And so there are a lot of pictures in this slide. So hopefully that kind of like gets you excited today. As I mentioned, we are a nonprofit organization here in the region. We really are supporting farmers, fishermen, food business owners, workers, organizers, funders, so kind of the whole spectrum of like what a food system is, not just one component or part. And we actually, our work in our organization and in our community and kind of network, and I say like we sometimes, but it's usually not even the we of the staff, it's like the kind of collective we of our network and our community. Our work is really guided by a regional vision that we developed in 2021, is when it was released. So right through the pandemic, we were in this 2-year planning process to develop a food vision for the region, which at that time was even more important, very clear, I think, to folks as well, why we needed this vision. And so really the goal of developing this plan at the time and now was to transform our food system over the next 10 years, but kind of take it beyond a plan and move it into really more of a movement in action. And so we really were intentional about rooting this plan and development in kind of community and people who are actually doing the work. And really with the intention of informing planning, policy, program, and investment. We know it's a pretty ambitious plan. I think I'll probably skip this video, but we'll share it with you. So if you're interested in watching it, I'm feeling it's gonna give me trouble if I try to play it. And you know, we know it's an ambitious vision. It is large. It has 3 goals, 10 objectives, and a whole bunch of strategies across the food system. But our goal is really to help guide the region in the same direction and start to make some progress with some of those objectives. Just a very brief overview of like, what is this actual vision and plan? I think it's helpful for folks to understand that in developing this large vision, it was really important that it was rooted in our community's needs and aspirations, and also rooted in research. So we didn't reinvent the wheel. You know, we didn't just start from nothing. There was a lot of work done previously. So a lot of research and analysis of existing plans. As I mentioned, intended to inform policy, program development, investment, because we know we won't be able to achieve the vision or anything in this vision without kind of all of these components. We kind of have always said at the end, this is going to take a lot of policy change and a lot of money, a lot of investment to actually see through. But we have to have that vision. And really for us, it's a movement, and that's a lot of the work we do at our organization is around mobilizing community, movement building, community building, and really making sure that our food system stakeholders have, you know, a seat at the table. So let me just skip ahead to show you. And so I was really interested when Eric reached out to ask us to come share, because, you know, when we talk about resiliency a lot when it comes to food systems and the work that we do. It's actually one of 3 goals of this vision: cultivate justice, fight climate change, and build resilience. We kind of always say not one of these can exist without the other. So it's really our overarching goals for our work and our vision. And although build resilience is just like one of the goals, we see that, you know, they're all intertwined and throughout. And then the vision has 10 objectives that are kind of broken up into different sections. So objectives 1 through 4 are really around addressing major challenges that our farms, fisheries, food businesses are facing. So really talking about, and workers, so really talking about the viability of these 4 food system stakeholders, which includes, you know, maintaining and increasing land and agriculture, which includes land stewardship. That's kind of all in those first 4 objectives. The objectives 5 through 7 are really around achieving food security, accessing traditional healthy foods, recovering food waste. So it's really about community food environments. And then the last few are really around addressing major challenges that communities of color face in shaping our food system, as well as developing and building a resilient food system. So I can share a little bit more about that. Objective 10 in the vision is actually, you know, developing a resilience plan for a food system. So a couple things I wanted to highlight, and I really just left this pretty, I guess, high level, because I wanted to share kind of, you know, where you are in your work right now in this board, you know, what might interest you in this kind of big, broad vision. So leaving lots of room to just chat and answer questions as well. But I think one thing that's really important to bring up about the work we're doing and what's really happening around the region right now is around strengthening our local food economy. And so we have a program at our organization called the Local Food Economy Lab. It is really around centering equity and community ownership. And we work to support the viability of these folks and through a variety of programs. So it's everything from like a tailored business, technical assistance, like wraparound business services program. We have, it's called Pollinator. So we have a third cohort starting this year. We are launching different community funds, farmer funds, to try to get funds out to, farmers to purchase equipment, land. And then we have a land stewardship area of our work as well. And so we actually just got approved funding to be able to start the development of an agricultural community land trust here in San Diego. So we have community land trust, but we don't have an agricultural focused community land trust. So that was one thing that came from this vision of like, where's the big gap that we need to fill? And so that is fresh news, and we're still in the planning. So it'll be a planning phase. We'll have basically farmers and land stewards will co-design that agricultural. And I think really when it comes to talking about, why maybe why Eric invited me here, why we're talking about food systems and resilience is that, we've seen over the last few years, I mean, we've always known our local food system needs to become more resilient. But I think throughout the pandemic and even now in our current climate and economy, people are seeing that a lot more visibly in their face when food shortages are more common, or there's a lot more discussion about, purchasing closer to home, purchasing more local, and why that's important. And so it's really important for us to continue to share, that narrative that our local economies are better when they're community based, when we have really strong local food systems, and they're better equipped to withstand, these big things we're talking about, like climate change or market shocks. And these are just some lovely pictures of Food Shed. If you are not familiar with Food Shed, they're a worker producer owned cooperative in San Diego. They aggregate from all the many small local farms in San Diego to distribute to our community, and they are growing, and they're really, like, I would say, a central key player of strengthening our local food system here in San Diego County, but in the city of San Diego. And for us, we always say a diverse food system is a resilient food system. This is kind of something that is very core to the work that we're doing, and diverse in like every aspect you can think of, from people to crops to how you're utilizing land or stewarding land. And I guess just a few things. I pulled some of this from our year in review because they did a really good job at talking about kind of what our food system could look like. And so there's work happening, every day in the county and in the city around regenerative farming by small scale farmers, ecological land stewards. I was really happy to see in this advisory board, I think it was like objectives or goals around traditional ecological knowledge as a core focus to lean on. That is really a big part of our work as well. Community supported fisheries and food hubs. There's a lot of cooperatives popping up, youth education, workforce development that are all really supporting building a more resilient food system. And ultimately what that would look like is shorter supply chains, diverse crops and growers, land that is cared for, and a workforce that is respected and supported. And that's what we're really visioning when we talk about a resilient food system. And I'll probably I think that is the last slide. My colleague wasn't able to make it today, but you're welcome to reach out to her if you have any questions about community engagement. But I'm happy to answer questions or dive a little deeper into any specific topic. And I kind of told Eric I was going to go broad and see where folks were interested in.
Thank you. Sure. Before we turn to questions, do we have any, public comment?
Just listening in. Okay, let's do virtually. I don't see any hands raised. We can move to the.
I have a couple of questions before I turn to the rest of the board. You mentioned food waste, and I'm wondering, if you could talk about some of the strategies also, or where there are a number of applications like Too Good to Go and other just very creative ways about going about that.
Yeah, definitely. So I have my computer next to me, so I was like, let me just pull up few things might be helpful. So in our vision, one of the strategies is around food recovery, food waste. There is a pretty robust network in San Diego working on food recovery. And so we don't have any specific programs at this time that are leading those efforts, but there is like a growing network of organizations, particularly feeding organizations that are trying to close that loop between food that could go to waste, recovering it and getting it to communities. In terms of the apps, they're definitely utilized by a lot of those folks, and there's a lot that are useful and work well, and there's a lot that pop up. So there's a lot of new apps always constantly around recovering food and food waste, and while it's it's with good intention, we find that like it's like the actual network of the people and really grassroots organizing that's required to do this, what is really just like a logistical task. They always talk a lot about like needing to bring in some like, people who are like really good at logistics. Because that really what it is, it's moving
Yeah.
food across the region, it's a logistical task that they're trying to tackle, but from a nonprofit feeding agency perspective. Now having to be in a position where they're having to figure out how to move food in a coordinated way. And so, yeah, I think this is why the work we do at the Alliance as a regional kind of body, kind of more of a backbone organization. A big portion of it does focus on that kind of community building organizing piece, because we know that if we're able to get the right folks together, that they will self-organize and mobilize and be able to move those projects forward. Not us, right? We're a team of 10, like we can only do so much, but we can get the right people together, they'll take off. So yeah, they do use that stuff.
Questions from the board? Andrew first and then.
Thanks very much. Super interesting, Rachel. And I appreciate the scope of the objectives for sure. I think that everything is in here, 1,000 things that I never thought of. But one of the things that the Resiliency Board has talked about and that I deal with more in my line of work is about the wildlife component of our communities. And there's a whole lot of work that farms can do to be more or less friendly to pollinators and all kinds of other things. So I appreciate that that's basically addressed in objectives 1 through 4, I presume. But I wanted to ask specifically, I just learned recently that you mentioned fisheries here, which is cool and something I rarely think about.
Yeah.
Totally a farming component that we use our county land for. I just recently learned that ranching is like over 50% of our agricultural land, no air quotes, but of our agricultural land in the county, or a large percent, larger than I thought. And I know for that land use, that type of land use, there's a whole suite of things that could be really great for birds and other wildlife, or really a factory farm that really pumps out cattle that taste good, kind of thing. So I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about the thinking or the next step below objectives about ranching or about fisheries and their kind of, or vegetable agriculture and its interaction with how to run it within its landscape context.
Yeah, that's a great question. So those 4 objectives, I guess the ones that I'll just call out that are specific to what you're talking about. The first objective is around preserving agricultural land and soils and investing in long-term food production. And then the second is around the viability of food businesses, fisheries, farmers. We have more recently included like ranchers into that.
Okay.
I would say at the time of developing this vision, and historically, I've been working in the food system here in San Diego pretty much all of my career. It is like there's like tensions and kind of has been difficult to develop strong relationships with a lot of ranchers. I think we're just not always maybe on the same page in terms of our vision. And there are a lot that are, but we're growing now into building more relationships because, as you mentioned, they're a big part of our local food system here, and they are facing unique challenges that I would say like farms or fisheries maybe aren't facing, right? So I don't have too much to speak towards that because of just, I think, the slow growth in getting connected and involved with ranchers. But I do know there are a handful of like values aligned ranchers in San Diego that are thinking about the land and stewarding the land and wildlife, the environment when they're doing their practices. And then there's folks that are not, right? Yeah, go ahead. And then, yeah, fisheries, engaging with our local fishing community has been like essential through the whole process. So we do kind of a network of local fisheries here, mostly in Tuna Harbor, some kind of going down the coast, that have really tried to integrate with community and local agriculture as well. So rather than just being this like separate thing, it is so different. They have a whole set of different challenges. There's a lot more collaboration happening between farms, nonprofits, and the fisheries to really consider our fish and seafood as another component of achieving food security, achieving food sovereignty and resilience. And so they're definitely a lot more involved and part of this kind of solution. And I would say in general, just kind of speaking to what I guess your initial question, in our network in particular, I think because of this vision really being rooted in like honoring the land and like following traditional practices and like climate smart agriculture and like thinking about being one of the goals, most of the folks we work with are pretty values aligned and are practicing agriculture, fishing, whatever it may be, in that way. Yeah, and there's a lot happening in the fishing world. It's fascinating.
Do you work with the California Sea Grant much? Yes, okay, because we work with them on non-fisheries kinds of things, but I know that they're always talking about, this is how hard it is to be a fisher person and run a business, and they seem like a really useful partner to bring in.
Yes, yeah, they're part of our leadership and have been part of the work for like a decade now. So yeah, it's really cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for being here. This is really interesting. So yeah, I work at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, so a couple questions a little bit more kind of germane to like climate side, as you mentioned. What are you hearing from the folks that you work with as far as concerns regarding climate, in terms of, especially on the agricultural side? We've known about wildfires here in San Diego, right, for a long time, but now we're seeing longer durations of dry periods, heat, those extended periods, and then then those are ended abruptly with stronger atmospheric rivers, so you have the flood side as well, right? And then water supply, right? So I'm sure you're hearing all this stuff, but I'm curious to see, what are they saying?
Yeah, no, all of that. I think it's just becoming more difficult to farm in a like, well, farming is never reliable and consistent, so, but it's becoming more difficult to predict and plan, right, for those potential shocks. And I do think it has given a lot of farmers, small farmers, the perspective of leaning into practices that will help mitigate. And so I wish I was an expert in farming, but to share what all those practices are, but like planting specific crops or having diverse fields or with crop cover, like just all sorts of different practices that I think folks are trying to implement to mitigate whatever it might be, if it's heat, if it's flooding, potential wildfire risks, because a lot of our agriculture is happening, in more North County, East County, in terms of larger agriculture. And then we have a lot of urban agriculture and small farms here in the city of San Diego. And so I think we've seen over the last few years, farmers completely lose crops to floods, to heat. And so now they're kind of having to re-strategize like how they're doing it. And I think that's when we talk about diverse and resilient, it's also part of it, like planting more diverse crops and a mix of crops, right? Typically no one here that we're working with is doing monocropping anyways, but really being a lot more intentional for that because it's at risk, right? Like people are having to move property and land. And you may have seen that Wild Little Farm, the San Ysidro River Valley closed recently. has been around for a very long time, central to the community and education for farming. They closed because they couldn't afford to continue to keep the place open with flooding every year. And so we're seeing actually like having to physically move spaces and also adapt to loss of crops, adapt to what you're able to grow and not grow. So, but I think they're invested and they want to do it, and a lot of, I think, what is needed and we are kind of constantly advocating for is like infrastructure. Like there's just such a need in this region for infrastructure for farmers and fisheries and food businesses, and then for access to land. So we have a lot of folks, new farmers, right? There's this kind of system of developing new farmers right now. We need more farmers in agriculture. But if there's not a pipeline of places for them to grow, we're just gonna continue to see that shrink in San Diego. So this is kind of, I think, for us at the Alliance, that's our focus area in terms of where's the gap in the region that we can play. But I have a lot of farmer connections that probably have a lot more to say on that in the question you just asked. I'm always happy to get you connected to like learn a little bit more directly from a farmer on like what they're experiencing. But it definitely has been difficult over the last few years.
A quick follow-up, what kind of
Yeah.
infrastructure exactly?
Yeah, I mean, like literal farming infrastructure, like, you know, equipment, refrigeration facilities, distribution spaces, irrigation. I mean, pretty much anything that could go into getting a farm up and running. There's just very little access to capital. And farmers run on really slim margins already, so to get going is just a barrier in itself, and then to stay going is a barrier as well, because they're operating on slim margins. So that's where this kind of cooperative ecosystem, I think, has grown in San Diego, because folks recognize that when they work together in a cooperative space, it's like a worker cooperative, producer cooperative, that they can make a better impact. So, you know, we're always looking for that infrastructure. So that's some of the work we're doing is trying to increase access to capital and pass-through funds and infrastructure. Yeah, so that they can sustain.
We have just a couple more minutes, so if we take one more quick question from the board, Dr. one.
Yeah, I'm just, you mentioned that building resilience is one of your 3 goals. As the Resilience Advisory Board, I'm really interested in how you define resilience. And in particular, what are the metrics you use to tell you whether you're seeing it increase?
Yeah, good question. So I think in terms of defining resilience, I got further away from my phone. In terms of defining resilience, I mean, that piece, like with those 3 objectives around justice, climate change, and resilience, the resilience component, when we intentionally, you know, named that, was really around being responsive to like climate and natural disaster and shocks to the system, and also building a strong local food economy. So like, I think we were thinking of resilience kind of from those 2 angles. Rather than me just saying like, yeah, broadly, this is how we think resilience is. You can interpret resilience in like so many ways. I think for us, we were really looking on those kind of 2 lanes of like, actual response to emergencies and natural disasters, and then also having a strong local food economy that is resilient long term. So it's almost like short term, long term resilience. And that's what objective 10 is, plan for a resilient food system. And the strategies under that are you know, like building a resilient, or like actually developing a food resilience plan to be able to respond to emergencies. I don't have it up anymore, but I think another one is partnering with tribal communities as a strategy to build resilience in the food system. So there are a few others that I just left my screen. But I think
maybe they're on your website. So
yes.
it's detailed.
Oh yeah, I'll send. There's a whole website for the vision that has like every objective, every strategy, and then there's an indicator dashboard that is speak to how do we measure, how can we measure that over time. There is a dashboard that has those like population indicators. This has been a hard thing for us though, we've been measuring, because we're talking about like, we've been on a little bit too much, right? We're talking about like big regional changes that like over a period of time, it requires like 3+ years to see a change, right? Like year to year, we may not see it, and also the data doesn't update year to year, so.
Thank you very much. We
Yeah,
greatly appreciate
thanks
your
for having me.
wonderful. And again, if we have any follow-up questions, we could send those to you.
Yeah, please reach out. I'm happy to chat.
And
Thank you.
Perfect. And finally, we have Mark Furniture with the city's natural resource manager of City Parks and Recreation Department, who will be presenting on the city's natural resource management plan, which is related to one of our party goals, if who's ready. And Mark, we have about 15 minutes for the presentation to give everyone enough time for a Q&A.
Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. Apologize for not being there in person. I'm recovering from a pretty extensive ankle surgery last week. So I'm laid up at home a little bit, but happy to be here today to kind of present with you guys. So I'm going to share my screen and kind of get into it a little bit here. Let me second. All right, share that. Let me put it into presentation mode. Well, maybe can everybody see that now?
Yes.
Yep.
Great. Okay. So like I said, my name is Mark Berninger. I'm the Natural Resource Manager for the City of San Diego's Open Space Division. My staff and I manage our MSCP, which is our Multiple Species Conservation Program, and our Vernal Pool Habitat Conservation Program. Throughout the city are upwards of 40,000 acres of parkland and preserve land in the city. And we're going to talk a little bit about, I'll just start off talking a little bit about the MSCP. I'm sure a lot of you folks kind of already aware of it. It's essentially a program that ensures the long-term viability of an ecosystem function of our native ecosystem within what we call the multiple habitat planning area. We designed it to protect our kind of restore biological resources. We do monitoring, we do management, we do a bunch of other things, acquisitions, grant writing. We also are in charge of our natural resource management plans, and we'll talk a little bit about those today. So a little bit about the MSCP. It kind of comes out of, the Endangered Species Act in 1973. A lot of things happened to kind of issue this permit with the city of San Diego. One of them being we had a failed sewer system. The city of San Diego has one of the most complex water and wastewater systems in the entire United States. We call it, with all the mesas, valleys, and canyons we have. And essentially, we were staying out of the canyons, but that's where critical infrastructure was. But now, if you look at the city, those places where we have critical infrastructure are also those areas that we have critical habitat for a lot of different species. So back in the early 80s, the city of San Diego was sued by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency for not doing enough to protect those areas and having too many spills. And then along with a lot of development pressure from developers who wanted to get into areas that couldn't because of impacts to gnatcatchers and stuff like that, the city embarked on this really aggressive and progressive plan to protect habitats across the city. And that includes a lot of different habitats. And, there's countywide, a lot of it, we have, we'll go into that a little bit, but there's about 12 different jurisdictions in Southwest San Diego County, and some individual sub-area plans. And we essentially were trying to take permits for this, for a lot of these incidental take permits for a lot of these species, which takes the development and resource protections into the city's plans, or the city's hands, excuse me. And that allows us to really dictate mitigation and things like that for the impacts to these 92 different species across the city. And it sets kind of like I said in here, it sets these plan-wide conservation strategies and goals. Some of those including the development of natural resource management plans. And so if we're looking at these natural resource management plans, what happens if we don't have them? If we don't have a regional habitat conservation program? You end up going the case by case project review on, and as we know, multiple developments can take many years a lot of times, and can span multiple political administrations, which can insert a lot of uncertainty when we're talking about these kind of things. And so what we're trying to do with our multiple species conservation program, again, what we have done since 1998, is implement these and take a lot of that guesswork out of the hands of developers. So they know exactly what, if they have impacts to coastal California gnatcatcher, they know how to mitigate for those impacts, and they know that for the next until 2047, that's going to be the way that those projects are dealt with, which is really, really beneficial if you know anything about development. Time is money, money is time, those kind of things. So it helps developers, it helps preserve the city of San Diego's open spaces. In fact, we have the largest urban nature preserve in the entire United States, outside of Juneau, Alaska, but they've annexed some state lands and things like that, and they have a much smaller city than the city of San Diego. But here we are in the city of San Diego, huge natural resource, huge biodiversity area. And what that really takes to do is really develop a lot of planning and a lot of coordination with our internal agency, internal departments, and federal wildlife agencies, state wildlife agencies. But again, you can see here, the goal is to preserve about 57,000 acres. It's actually 57,727 acres of land by the year 2047. Almost more than 90% of that has been preserved at this point, with another probably 8% that's dedicated. So we're really working on those last couple thousand acres at this point. And like I said, our permit's valid until 2047. And our vernal pool HCP actually was brought on due to another lawsuit by the Sierra Club and others, saying that we were not doing enough to manage and protect vernal pool species. So as a matter of restitution of that lawsuit, we added 7 new species of 5 new species of plants and 2 species of animals to our MSCP under the cover of this vernal pool habitat management plan. And so you can see here here's where the habitat conservation programs are in southern San Diego County. We have the light blue here is our MSCP, which includes us and then a few other municipalities in there, and you can see other parts of the county. There's the Western County or Eastern County and Northern County areas. There's Camp Pendleton and some of the other military bases there that are not part of this, but they have their own kind of plans and whatnot. So in the kind of the western area, you can see there's multiple different cities. There's the city of San Diego and kind of that dark gray, bluish gray, gunmetal gray, you want to call it. We have our own plan. The city of Chula Vista has their plan. Santee is developing their plan. East County is also in development. North County is also in development. But some of the smaller cities, Imperial Beach, National City, Lemon Grove, La Mesa, Del Mar, and Poway, don't really have the means or the necessity at this point to create those plans. But so here within the city of San Diego, all these dark gray areas is where our multiple habitat planning area is. And so what we're looking at is these are areas where the MSCP is enacted and where it's valid. You can see a lot of them include like riverine and canyon areas. You can see the San Diego River in here. You can see this is Mission Trails out here, East Elliott, Los Penasquitos. Here's some of the other MHPA areas up north, Black Mountain, the San Pasqual Valley and the agricultural preserve up there. Then we go down south to the Otay Valley Regional Park, and we have areas like San Ysidro and Goat Mesa down here, and then some of these areas out here, the Cornerstone lands. You can see out here outside the city limits, San Vicente Reservoir, Otay Reservoir, and this is Marone Valley out here where Tecate Creek and Cottonwood Creek meet to form the Tijuana River headwaters. So we have a huge preserve system. It's over 51,000 acres at this point. 27,000 acres are open to the public. This is I didn't include the vernal pool HCP species in here, but we have 92 rare, threatened, and endangered species, 178 miles of trailheads, 178 trailheads, and over 250 miles now of different trails through all these areas. Similar in size to many national parks. The difference being that a lot of these national parks have one boundary, or maybe a couple different units within those boundaries, but they don't have nearly the amount of what we call the wild and urban interface that we do. And so, in order to protect these areas, one of the things that we dive into is the development of our natural resource management plan. So, a natural resource management plan, what that does is it gives us area specific management directives to manage those sensitive species in those areas, and they're really kind of isolated areas within our MHPA. Here you can see our list of ongoing and existing and planned our natural resource management plans. You know, we can see some of them have been done long time ago. Mission Bay was done well before the MSCP even came into play. It was done in 1990, and it was there to protect least terns, California least terns, salt marsh birdbeak, and a couple other rare and endangered plants in the Mission Bay area. Other places like Los Penasquitos, Marion Bear, Black Mountain, Carmel Mountain. Those were all done in the late 2000 or late 90s and early 2000s. And most recent one we've had published was the Mission Trails Natural Resource Management Plan, and that was finalized in May of 2019. Currently, the city has about four in progress. Those are for the Tecolote Canyon Natural Resource Management Plan, which is obviously includes Tecolote Canyon and some of the surrounding areas. Um, that one is kind of on hold right now as a large infrastructure project is being put through the canyon right now, and it will actually benefit the natural resource management planning and trails planning because that project is actually going to build a lot of the creek crossings and stuff we had identified in our natural resource management plan for us and mitigate those for us. So we don't have to, we're not going to have to mitigate as much for our trails plan and that program. The other two you see down there next are Crest Canyon, Pacific Highlands Ranch, Gonzales Canyon, and Carmel Valley. Those, after some internal review and internal development, we decided that those areas are best when we lump them together because geographically they're very, very similar in the very similar areas. Ecologically, they have much of the same functions and values together, but they at one point they were separated. So now we've kind of lumped them together. Our hope is that one is probably the closest to being done right now. We just finished up some biological surveys with the Natural History Museum this past spring, and we're flabbergasted by the amount of information we didn't know we didn't know. Let's put it that way. We had over 300 species of plants listed in our original natural resource management plan as being existent in those areas. With the help of John Redmond and the Natural History Museum, that number is now skyrocketed over 600 different species of plants. And that is not all of those are rare and endangered plants, and some of them are invasive and some of them are non-native. But the existence of those plants is something really beneficial to us when we kind of looking at threats and opportunities within those areas. Threats being, you know, impacts from development and impacts from invasive species and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, and opportunities are where can we build resiliency into these canyons? Where can we build native plant reservoirs? Where can we build and expand those rare and endangered species? So those are really things that are identified in the natural resource management planning. And our staff, being very small but mighty, has been working diligently on this for many years. But we're really hamstrung by the fact that we have 6 months of the year we're in the field doing rare plant monitoring. So we're out there monitoring all the different rare plant species that we have within the city and vernal pool species we have in the city. So we really have a very limited amount of time and staffing to get these things done. Not to say that they're not vitally important to this the role of open space and to the city and our resiliency. Is just that we are really limited by the amount of time and staff we have. Additionally, one other one we've started and have collected a lot of data is the Western Otay Rally Regional Park. And that area is down in Chula Vista, along the border of Chula Vista and the city of San Diego, on the south part of San Diego. We're working in conjunction with the county and our partners at the city of Chula Vista there to develop the natural resource management plans for those areas. Lot of different endangered species there. Lots of birds, Dudleya, Orcutt's birds beat. Lot of narrow endemics exist down there. And so again, that takes into a whole nother subset of of problems that we have down there, including a lot of issues with unsheltered folks and a lot of kind of development and people that and recreation gone awry down there, as we see, where we had a lot of, for many years in that area, there was no limit on where you could take your dirt bike or your four-wheeler or whatever. And we've seen a lot of impacts through there, and it's slowly waning, but it's a definitely a challenge. And those are some of the things that these natural resource management plans hope to really address, is so that when our rangers or resource management staff go down there and they're looking at these resources, how do they protect them? How can we restore them? How can we build resilience into these ecosystems to help them thrive into the future? And that's something that these plans really help dictate. And in previous years, if you've looked at any of the plans that you've seen before, what you've seen is a really text heavy, lot of documents and a lot of lists and things like that, and it was really hard for the average person to kind of dive into this and really glean any meaning out of it. So what we've done in these four that are upcoming is really made them very much user friendly. We want these to be living documents that you can open up and reference. Our resource management staff, our ranger staff can look in there, our planning staff can look at these documents and say, okay, if we're looking at Crest Canyon, what are one of the things we want to do is we want to reduce the existence of purple veldgrass, or we want to increase our Coryzanthe population, some small native endangered plants populations. And so how do we do that? And having these plans kind of dictate those steps on how to do that, where to do it, and what's most appropriate to kind of prioritize. That also helps us when we're looking at grants.
Mark, we have just a couple minutes.
Okay. All right. So I'm almost done here. So yeah, and then you can see we have many more that are on deck and ready to go after these get finished, and probably I'll liken it to painting the Golden Gate Bridge. Honestly, once we're done with all this stuff, we'll likely have to start back over. One of the ones that I know that is already on the list to start back over is Mission Bay. I mean, it was completed over 35 years ago, where some of the resources that are there now weren't even present when we were writing those documents. There was no mention of the bird of prey, the osprey, in those natural resource management plans, because prior to 1990, there was almost no nesting osprey in all of San Diego County. Now I believe we have like 8 different nesting locations in Mission Bay or in the surrounding area there. So protecting those species, protecting the species they rely on, very, very important. And as we're going forward, you can see one of the things we're going to help start to develop here is a priority plan that takes into account a lot of different aspects. This is kind of the boundaries of some of our natural resource management plans. You can kind of see here, and I'll send these slides to Julia. So if anybody wants to take a look at them, you certainly can down the road. But I really appreciate you guys letting me talk to you for a little bit here, and I'm more than happy to answer questions. If you want to dive into this more deeply, please send Julia an email, send me an email. I'm more than happy to really kind of get into this on a one-to-one basis if that's something you're interested in. But at this point, I'll stop sharing and kind of answer any questions you guys have.
Thank you, Mark. Before we check for public comment and Q&A, just for people who are watching, where can they access these plans for the current status?
All the plans are available on Park and Rec's website. I don't have it's you have to go to open space management plans. It's kind of it's a subfolder off to the side. I'll see if I can't find that here in a second and send that to Julia, a link to those pages. But the ones that are completed are available on the city's website. Ones that are still in draft process are not yet available, but they should be once they get completed. They'll go to City Council for approval through I think the Environment Committee as well, and so there'll be a chance for public comment and comments and edits on those through that process.
Is there any newsletter or any other way for people to subscribe for notifications on where the department is on these various plans?
I don't think that we don't typically provide that as like an annual update or anything. We provide an annual update through our MSCP report that we publish publicly. Those are typically kind of where we're at on an annual basis. As prior in a more granular state, we don't really have that. If you are interested, certainly you can just reach out and we can kind of tell you where we're at.
Wonderful.
But they do take several years to complete at this rate. You know, we're working on about one every 5 years, which is not great because we have we have about 22 years left to go, and we have about 22 more natural resource management plans to complete. So we're going to have to start picking things up here, and which is one of the reasons we asked for more staff last year, and those staffing were unfortunately not filled due to budget cuts this year. So unfortunately, but we hope to get back going on Crest Canyon and Gonzales Canyon this year. Hopefully, have that finished by the end of the calendar year this year.
Julia, do we have any public comment?
We do not. If you are attending virtually and you'd like to provide public comment, please raise your hand, or if you're calling in by phone, you can press *9.
Questions from the board? Erica?
I understand whether we have, how much time we have. I have basically two questions, and one of them is, the plans, are they written more for the internal use of staff to guide the, priorities in your management of the area, or are they accessible to the public? Will the public get out of them, some useful information?
Yes, that's a yes to both questions. So they are really meant to be managed or be accessed by internal city staff and utilized as kind of a roadmap to management. But like I said, in previous years, those have been really kind of verbose, wordy documents that really, unless you're looking for something specific, you're not going to really gain a lot out of that. These new versions that we're putting together are very much more graphic rich, a lot of infographics. There are kind of field guides on the back of each one of them with the main species for them. So if you're looking at, they're color coded, so you can look at threats and you can. So there's a lot more that we've done to make these very user friendly documents, so they can be used by the general public and people that are interested in learning more about those areas. Yeah.
That's great. And then the second question I had, maybe you can be very succinct on this, and that is the role of the San Diego Natural History Museum and helping you move ahead with with the work that goes into the plans.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily linked only to the Natural History Museum. We use partners at U.S. Geological Survey, our partners at SANDAG and the SDMMP, the San Diego Management and Monitoring Program, and other, even other consultants that have helped us do biological surveys out there. We utilize them as kind of as a branch of our natural resource management staff to help us kind of fill those gaps when we have money to bring their services on board. But right now, a lot of the work is being done in-house, with a few things being farmed out here and there. More specifically, listing plant species, that kind of stuff. But a lot of it is done by our botanist and biologist here in-house.
Thank you.
Andrew?
Thanks, Mark, very much. We work with Mark and his awesome staff on all kinds of projects, especially Mission Bay related, but Otay Valley and a lot of other places. They do amazing work with very little resources. Mark, I think you kind of mentioned this. I know it's a bad budget year for the city in so many ways, but in the next 22 years, with 22 plans to go, or whatever the metric was that you mentioned, what is your hope and what is your reality check on how we all convince the city of San Diego to really finish those natural resource management plans so that those assets are managed as they should be under the existing MSCP program and requirements?
That's a great question, Andrew. Thanks, and thanks for all your support in the previous years and currently. But yeah, we really just need more help. I mean, and in what we've put together in the past years is like a 5-year look ahead on what we need to kind of complete these roles. One of the things that I really I'm looking forward to is there is a whole metric in the climate action plan about completing natural resource management planning. And as part of that, what we've done is implemented a kind of this 5-year plan of like what do we need to build out our program in order to complete all these natural resource management plans. And that's an internal document that we provided to our city planning team, our Parks and Rec team, the mayor's office, city council, whoever wanted to look at it. And what that did was kind of laid out our plan to kind of develop this natural resource management unit within open space to develop these plans. And it includes adding additional management staff, botanists, biologists, who else? Park rangers, basically folks that help implement this, GIS analysts, and then our hope is that at some point we can build our program up to the point where we can start applying for some larger grants to help with some of this stuff. Even we've gone so far prior to COVID, we were bringing in a consultant into our department to work with us, like hand in hand in the division, like have an office in our department. And after COVID, that fell apart, and then the contract expired, and we never were able to build that resiliency in that contract back up. But the hope is that I think city staff really understand this, and that's why we got 12 new staff last year through the city's budget process. And one of the things the concessions we made with those 12 staff is we wouldn't hire them until January of 2025. And then December came along and a hiring freeze came. I will say we have been very lucky, and we were able to hire one staff out of two staff members there. We hired a pesticide applicator, and we hired a GIS analyst, which has been huge for our division. We hadn't had those GIS analyst position or mapping specialist for over 10 years in our division after it was lost due to another RIF, reduction in force previously. So anything that this board can do to advocate on behalf of these natural resource management plans, I think would be beneficial at any level. You know, if lobbying the mayor or city council staff to include additional funds for management, funding for additional staff members, that all would be very, very appreciated. So, and I don't really have a roadmap for how that looks. I just would put that into your hands, as you guys can be the advocates for it. I can tell my bosses and their bosses what we need to do. But what really comes down to is where the funding is coming from. And the next couple of years don't look great for that, but that won't stop us from working and moving forward.
Any other questions? Well, thank you so much again, Mark, and we hope that your ankle heals up pretty quickly.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. I'm ready to I'm not a sit around the house kind of guy, and this is really bugging me, to be honest with you. So I like to be out in the field doing stuff. So the sooner I can get out, the better, but following doctor's orders at this point.
Finish a couple management plans, Mark.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got some extra time on my hands. Yeah. Well, I
Thank you,
appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys today. Thank you. All right.
So we are moving back to item 8, our action item. I know that we will lose quorum a little bit before the hour. So just going back to this item 8A, which is selection of focus area for priority goal number 2 in community wildfire resilience. This has been one that we've been carrying over the past few meetings. So far, it seems like we've been taking a cumulative approach rather than selecting one focus areas, noting certain things that stand out to us that with each report or research that we do. So I'll turn it over to the board for your thoughts on this.
I'll go ahead and just reiterate my thoughts from several meetings now. I think my sense is as a board that we should select, as we've been talking about, this topic of public access to the risk and wildfire resilience. And that's the key, I think, is that public access and awareness. Part of the discussion on this topic says, well, should we do further, briefings? Should we do further work as a board? I'm going to suggest that we really just make it part of our annual plan or report that we are going to be working on. So I'll bring that comment up when we talk about the item number 10, but that's just where I am on this.
You make a formal motion or just continue discussion?
Yeah, I don't have a formal motion at this point.
Any thoughts from the rest of the board? Erica?
I just have the feeling that we've talked about this before, and I'm just not sure whether we. It feels to me like an agenda item that has been discussed but never concluded. I just don't know where we. I thought a couple of meetings ago, we had actually drafted up a recommendation on this. What happened with that?
It is still adopted. The question is there anything else we want to do on that? If not, at our next meeting, we'll be starting to talk about pulling together recommendations for our annual report. So if folks would prefer just to do that, and just ahead, well, that's actually for item 10. I'll talk a little bit more about that.
Is it possible that we could refresh on what that previous recommendation said? So maybe we need to
From last meeting, what we talked about was,
There was one from April, I think it was from April, that was a specific recommendation, if I have that
Okay.
correctly. Video.
yeah. There was a few, one of which, so, yeah, from April's meeting, board member Lardy suggested that the city is still working on complying with SB 99 and AB 747, so our role would be to stay informed and weigh in when we're ready. And then board member Williams said, maybe we should come up with a set of monitoring metrics to track the city's progress based on their many goals to help guide them along the initiatives for state compliance and help hold the city accountable. And help elected officials understand how well the city is meeting the state requirements, include outreach to disadvantaged communities, et cetera. So developing a list of metrics or considerations that the city can follow and you can help. I guess for yeah, go ahead.
what was that in service of metrics and what was the objective there?
Actions that the city is taking in to comply with those two, the SB.
These were the safety plan updates.
Mhm. And then board member Morgan said for communities that are now in designated risk zones, do they realize that they're in designated risk zones and are they knowledgeable about their evacuation plan, or should we focus on recovery, microgrids, et cetera?
Yeah, so I certainly remember that discussion. Did we come up with an actual recommendation we voted on? So I had the feeling
I
that
think
we
we
crafted
postponed it.
language there.
Oh. Well, there was a
But-
motion from board member Lardy that the city continue to prioritize completion and communication of fire hazard mapping with SB 99 and AB 747 and other state plans and return to REV with any updates. And then we amended that motion to say continue to prioritize completion and communication of the fire hazard mapping in compliance with the SBAB and other state plans in return. And prioritize communities that lack emergency evacuation routes.
Okay, so that really
That
was kind of
passed.
already, that's already a recommendation that we have, so I feel finished on that one then.
Jamie, could we pull together for our July meeting, just a list of all the motions we adopted on, well, mostly this priority item?
Sure.
Yeah, and then we could send that around with the materials beforehand.
Okay.
We don't have to take action on item 8, but so what it sounds like, unless someone else can jump in, is that just moving ahead to pulling together our recommendations in the annual report. That's the current sense of getting the report. Is that largely correct?
I have a question. Stan, your idea about including this kind of thing in our annual plan makes a lot of sense to me, but just to understand that before we get to topic 10, you're saying then the value to the community would be that information, resources, websites, existing plans, updates would be in our annual plan, and as we share that with the public, those resources would then be disseminated from us to the public. Is that true?
Not exactly, it's a good idea, but that's not what I was actually saying. Let me just read this because I put together a quick note. As we're developing our annual report, I'd like you all to consider including a section focusing on improving homeowner support in wildfire prone areas. This, of course, is based on our prior board discussions and all the presentations so we would, in our annual report, we would recommend that the city of San Diego create a centralized wildfire information hub with interactive maps, clear code triggers, and defensible space requirements to launch a public outreach effort, including fact sheets, mailers, webinars, and forums to help residents understand wildfire risk and available resources. 3, and of course, this could stop at any number. Develop a vetted contractor directory to support safe and code compliant mitigation work. And the 4th one, pilot or develop a wildfire resilience advisor program to provide personalized guidance for residents, especially those in high risk and underserved communities. The idea of this is that these actions would address the widespread confusion that's out there right now, that I personally am aware of, and reduce barriers to action that I think all the homeowners and property owners in these areas are facing. And at the same time, improve community wildfire resistance, but not by us doing anything ourselves in terms of here's this website and here's the information, just making these recommendations to the city to consider as a board recommendation. We do our annual report, and that's kind of the concept.
Any other thoughts on this?
This feels very much like unfinished business to me. I think there's a lot of good stuff you've got in your recommendations there, Stan. And I do think we need a way to bring these recommendations together so we can all work out.
In that case, I'd like to move to item 10, which is directly on that. So for proposed agenda items for future meetings, for July, because we go dark on August, is we'll start talking about preparing that report. Stan, I think you may have volunteered yourself to be on the task force to draft that report.
Yeah.
What I will be doing is similarly when we were putting together the other priority goal is I'm gonna develop a method to collect everyone's ideas, have it sent to me so that we can make it a little easier logistically. And then determine a task force to work on that over August to bring back to the board on September. Those are largely my thoughts on process. So for those who may be interested in being on that task force, to start thinking about that over the next few weeks.
So really, you're making 2 asks. One is the task force, but also for us to be thinking about what our own recommendations would be.
Exactly. thank you, that was a missing step there. So please start thinking about the recommendations that we'll be making in stance. Hopefully you already have very clearly worded.
So can a motion be for back to the action item that kind of the one that board member Williams stated originally, that we integrate any thoughts or recommendations around priority goal 2 into our annual report? I mean, is that needed?
No, I
Oh,
don't think we
okay.
need a motion since we're just going to have everyone submit their ideas and then those
So
will
we
be-
don't need a motion for action, even though it's an action item. We don't need to. Okay,
There's an option, but if we're just going, but it may not be necessary.
okay.
I think it would get lost in the weeds too.
I have a question for the board if we're ready on it.
Yeah.
Finish with that thought, having to do with this written public comment that was submitted. And this came about in conversation I had with Jose Bueno, who will speak to us about energy storage systems in 2026, when we have time to do that. He made a very specific recommendation having to do right, and the reason he submitted this now was because he wanted it to get some consideration in this current set of recommendations, if possible, having to do with the role that EVs can play as resilience tools. So the concept he has is that the city that we make a recommendation to the city to consider in any purchases that they may be making in the remainder of the year or the next year, whenever, because these things take time, that the bidirectional charging ability of any city EVs be considered, because there are more and more models coming out of the market that are bidirectional in nature, which means that rather, sitting in your yard, it powered house, kind of thing. So that was the reason for this written comment to bring before the board. And my question to you would be, do we want more information on this prior to consideration of it as recommended?
There's also 3 avenues here, because either a board member can include that in their recommendation that will be sent to me. It could be considered by the task force if that doesn't happen. And also when we bring our recommendations forward for discussion, or the task force brings them forward for discussion in September, is this gentleman could participate in that as a member of the public to give comment on that. But I'll leave it to the board if we would like him to come to our next meeting in July to discuss that.
Nope, just a slight reframing. Do we need more information? People have an opportunity to look at this, or if you look at it as it's self-explanatory, is there more information we need? Maybe the answer is yes, maybe the answer is no. Then we can consider whether.
Thoughts?
I think your July agenda is fairly full already. So I think I would either move to have it be out of future agenda, or have something that can be part of one of the board member recommendations that goes to the report out.
I'm certainly prepared to make this as a recommendation. The question is whether, when we get to deciding these recommendations, whether we can feel fully informed enough to make a decision on it. That's all.
An option would be to encourage them to attend the September meeting when these recommendations are discussed by the board. Okay, more information on that.
Erica, I think that the comment that this person sent in is more information than we're gonna get up than a lot of the other board recommendations that we have to what should go into the annual plan, right? I mean, so I think a lot of work has been done to give the board information about this particular issue. And it's up to us to figure out whether we personally, feel yes or no on that. Yep. And we'll all be bringing ideas like that without this much
Background.
right? I think,
Yes.
so good on him already.
Good on them already. All right, I'll tell them.
And
Because in some cases, we've had full presentations already to inform what we're gonna come up with.
It's also a really good point to bring up is who the intended audience of our report is, will be the city council, so making it digestible for the council to.
What are you saying, Sid?
That they have a gazillion items on each council agenda docket, so we wanna make sure that this gets to the point. How's that sound?
Great, that's understood.
A former staff member, I remember having to go through, all of those gazillion items. The staffers will appreciate it.
Yeah.
That's where we're going.
Oh, and anyone else have anything for the future agenda? I know we have the brush management activities, preparation for our report and recommendations. Also in September, we will be discussing grid resilience. So thank you so much, Erica, for organizing that. Anything else?
Is the brush management activities at the July meeting? I'm sure I was told this many times.
I don't think we don't have a requested presentation for that for the July meeting.
Okay, oh yes, this was a request to have an update on that later on. So the July meeting, we have the report recommendations. Anything else on docket that we're?
Biodiversity presentation on the MSDP and the DHCP, the multi-species conservation plan for.
Thanks for the reminder, greatly appreciate it. Quick question,
And
Would-
the water one.
the
Were
pure
you
water
gonna say
San
that?
Diego? Oh, no, please,
No, the resilience.
Who's that topic?
yes, the
Did you
resilience
say that?
topic, yeah,
Oh,
of course.
sorry.
And that is on. Those three
The
items,
San Diego County water.
and there's been a lot of movement on that recently.
Yeah.
Perfect. Julie, would there be potential to have CERT San Diego present at a future meeting? CERT, Community Emergency Response Team from Fire Department,
I can request and see.
with specifically on fire, community resilience to wildfire. Yeah, July would probably be very full, but perhaps for September, which is very much in fire seasons.
Yeah, we'll-
I think that's about it. Anything else before we adjourn? All right, so item 11, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.